Hello, my name's Marcus Patterson. I'm the publisher of International Environmental Technology and the organiser of the WEM Water, Wastewater and Environmental Monitoring Conference and Exhibition. We're here today carrying on our series of water quality monitoring videos. We're here for two reasons. One, we love fishing, and two, we're going to carry on discussing why water quality is important in the UK, and also this river holds freshwater fish such as salmon and trout. I mentioned salmon for two reasons. First, I'm not very good at catching salmon, but I'm here today to try. But secondly, salmon are a very good indicator of how clean water is. And today we're on the River Test. So just have a quick look at the cleanliness of the water and how clear it is. It's a chalk stream. It's particularly well looked after because it's looked after by fishermen. However, not all rivers in the UK are as clean as this. We'll be speaking to Nick Measham, who's head of WildFish, who'll be telling us a little bit more about why we need to get better river water quality.
So thank you for that introduction, Marcus. I should tell viewers that Marcus wasn't successful in his attempt to catch a salmon that day, although he did catch a couple of sizable brown fish that he was very pleased with. So to kick off then, I wonder, thanks for joining us, Nick Measham, CEO of WildFish. Thank you so much for joining us. I wonder, Nick, if you could kick off by telling us a bit about the organisation.
Great, okay. Well, for those of you who don't follow the, if you like, the environmental NGO world, you might think that WildFish is a new entrant. We've actually been around for over 100 years. We began life as the Salmon and Trout Association, which was basically the working arm of the Fishmongers Company, dedicated to protecting stocks of salmon and sea trout in rivers. In those days, for as much for commercial netting purposes as for game fishing. Fast forward, we became the Salmon and Trout Conservation in 2008, when we became a charity devoted to protecting wild fish and their habitats, with a particular focus on salmon, of course, because the extraordinary life cycle of the salmon is such that if rivers and our coasts, our estuaries and the oceans are fit for salmon, then they're fit for most fish. So the salmon remains a very important component of all the work that we do. What sets us apart from other organisations is that we are a campaigning charity. We are independently financed. We do not take any government money. We do not take any money from polluters such as water companies or others that might be causing harm. We do that deliberately in order to allow us to be able to hold them to account without any risk of loss of funding or other pressures being brought to bear on us. Our approach is to use evidence. We do a lot of our own monitoring. We have a program called Smart Rivers, which trains people to monitor invertebrates, the little insects that live in rivers, to the same standards that the Environment Agency does. So that allows us to compare our data with theirs and have a conversation with them on level terms. We then use that data to inform our campaigns across three main areas. Salmon farming, we are fighting to get open net salmon farming closed down. It does a huge amount of damage to salmon in their migratory phases when they're going out to sea and when they're coming back into the rivers to breed. We have a major focus on water quality. We've been doing a lot of work around sewage, using the data, in many cases, the data we get from our Smart Rivers monitoring. And the final area is we do a lot of campaigning to clean up agriculture, which in many cases is as big a problem, if not a bigger problem, than sewage for the water quality in our rivers. And the final strand is water quantity, the other component that rivers need, apart from clean water, they need lots of it. And there is a continual battle with water companies to get them to reduce their reliance on rivers for water supply. So roughly speaking, those are the things that we do. We're a relatively small team, and there are full-time 12 of us on the payroll. We operate nationally, and as I say, given our distinctive niche of using evidence and science to and the law when we need it to shape policy, it seems to work pretty well.
Sure. So the situation with salmon, I think, is particularly interesting. And have you been able to form a view as to whether or not river water quality has been a factor in the decline of Atlantic salmon numbers?
I think the reasons for the salmon's decline are many, and it is somewhat complicated. But there is no doubt in our minds that river water quality, combined with other factors that we can control, water quantity and barriers to migration, are big factors in limiting salmon populations. There's no doubt in our minds that the loss of good spawning habitat, small streams that have been polluted in the headwaters of our salmon rivers has had a major impact, and water quality is a continuing important factor in that decline.
And the focus in the media, there hardly a day seems to go by at the moment without some news story relating to sewage pollution and/or sewage overflows, and they always seem to reference river water quality with bathing. Are you happy with that focus?
Well, no, not entirely. Or one could say no, not at all. I mean, our fundamental starting point is that rivers have a crucial, broad ecological function. They're havens of or should be havens of biodiversity, very important contributors to our, if you like, our environmental well-being and the robustness of our, of our environment. The problem is that we're not against bathers or bathing water status. Funnily enough, fish are not particularly disturbed by wild swimmers, kayakers, or others in balance. However, where you form these kind of hotspots of a large number of bathers, there are some rivers in which that is fine. There are other rivers where it is not appropriate, and the bathing water status regulations are quite a funny set of regulations, because in order to have bathing water status, you have to demonstrate that there's a bathing water season between mid-May and early September. And you have to demonstrate that during that season, for a site to have bathing water status, it has to be accessed by, you have to demonstrate that it is accessed by at least an average of 100 bathers a day. That's a lot of footfall. And obviously that footfall will have an impact on the river. It'll be churning up the riverbed and so on, and could be disturbing juvenile fish, etc., etc. So that's one aspect of it, that it needs to be, needs to be managed. And I think that the current regulations are too blunt a tool. And the other side of it, in addition to that 100 bathers a day average and so on, is the if you like, this kind of somewhat implied approach that rivers are playthings and there's like a sort of a theme park or something. They're not. They're a very important facet of nature, and that has to balance out. We're not denying the right of, I certainly wouldn't want to prevent, many different users using our rivers. One of the great challenges of conservation is balancing up this issue of access versus what the environment actually needs. And at the moment, to get someone to love and care about rivers, we need people who aren't fishermen, who aren't, if you like, privileged, in inverted commas, privileged users of those rivers, who also have a stake in looking after them. And if they're denied access, they can't do that. However, too much access is going to destroy the fragile environment that many of these rivers actually are. If you take the chalk streams, the Test and the Itchen, they're relatively modest in size, but they have a very diverse sort of ecosystem, and too much pressure on it too many people in the river will damage parts of those rivers. So it's a question of getting the balance right, in my view. Mm. And I think that's a challenge for organisations like my own. And I'm the first to admit that, our challenge is to get people to love wild fish and their habitats, and we're not doing enough to get the wonders of fish out there so that people can appreciate the other wonderful creatures that have a legitimate stake in using rivers, who were there first, if you like. But it's sort of a frustration. I get the point. The point is our rivers are dirty, and we can put a lot of pressure on cleaning them up. But actually, interestingly, the bathing water approach is to look at water quality from the point of view of humans. So it's interested in things like various bacteria in the water, E. coli, and so on. That's less of an issue for fish. Fish are more concerned about various forms of agricultural pollution, chronic buildup of pesticides and other chemicals, phosphates, nitrates, which overstimulate weed growth in the river and potentially choke out other forms of life, invertebrates and so on, by absorbing too much oxygen. So it's a bit of a different thing, really. But I think bathing water status in moderation or in context is no bad thing. But I am worried when it becomes the single issue. That is too simple a way to look at things.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, I know that, and you mentioned that evidence is vital, and the gathering of scientific information is vital to the work of WildFish. Now, with the Environment Act 2021 now in place, there's going to be an enormous amount of water quality data available over the next few years as the water companies implement this upstream and downstream monitoring of all discharges. Is that part of the Act? Is that something you welcome?
Well, we certainly welcome more investment in monitoring. Our first preference would be for that monitoring to be actually done by the Environment Agency. The reason for which is that the agency is responsible for holding water companies to account to ensure that they meet the requirements of the discharge permits that they have. And the Environment Agency can only use its own data in holding the water companies to account. So there's a question in my mind as to the water companies' data. Will be interesting to get an idea of what's going on, but you still need to make sure that you have an Environment Agency that is carrying out its own monitoring, independent monitoring. And I do worry. I mean, water companies, and some of them have been heavily fined for cheating, for misrepresenting or making up their own monitoring results of discharge in regard to discharging sewage and the like. And there's a system in place called operator self-monitoring, where basically the water companies do their own monitoring subject to audit by the Environment Agency. The audits haven't necessarily been as thorough or as comprehensive they should be, because they're basically risk-based. So if things look okay, they don't dig too deeply, basically. But it has been the case that water companies, often owned by private equity and other forms of investor, pushing the water companies very hard to maximize profits. And to that end, water companies cut corners, and it is the case that monitoring, or the veracity of their monitoring, has suffered as a result. So, I mean, the first best solution is that monitoring, what we really want is an environment agency with the resources to carry out its regulatory duties wholly independently of the water companies. Unfortunately, that isn't currently the case. So while we're going to get some more information, we've got to question how reliable that information is, and also rue the fact that we haven't got the Environment Agency with the resources to be doing it itself.
Sure.
That would be our position on it. And the reason we do this monitoring is because the Environment Agency doesn't do, and this monitoring that we do is not to above, exclusively above and below sewage works. It's to monitor the river itself to get an idea of the underlying water quality, because the invertebrates in the river tell a very powerful story, because they're absorbing all of the muck that goes past them 24 hours a day. And by looking at the various species, you can tease out quite a lot of information about what's going on.
Will the data from all of these new monitoring stations be useful to WildFish?
Well, we'll look at it and use it. We do use, the Environment Agency provides an awful lot of data itself. If there's other data, subject to its quality, yes, it'll all be used. It'll be there to be scrutinised and looked at, and that's part of our job is to do exactly that.
But it should certainly, presumably, it should create a pretty comprehensive picture of water quality across the whole country.
Well, we actually have historically and to date, we actually don't have that bad a picture of water quality, and there are it's like everything else, actually. The quality of what you're doing and the processes that you're actually undertaking matter a lot in determining the sort of the quality of the information you're getting out of the process. And a fair bit of what's going on is citizen science. Our own project is citizen science, but the trick with citizen science is in training citizens to take good samples and to be able to analyze those samples. And many of the techniques work moderately well, but they are subject, an awful lot of this data collection is subject to kind of sampler error. And it is a fact that training people to be volunteers is demanding. I mean, volunteers need to be motivated. It's, and you're asking them to do something that properly is, in an ideal world, would be carried out by Environment Agency professionals. So we do this work with marvelous people, and it gives us fantastic results. But you still need to have that independent Environment Agency monitoring. And the water company systems are not quite that delineated. Or their approach isn't. So I think it's going to be interesting to see how it develops.
Well, that leads nicely into my next question, which was to ask you in what ways you see water quality monitoring developing. It sounds to me like the development that you'd like to see would be for more resources and focus to be placed on the Environment Agency rather than water companies doing the monitoring.
Well, yes, we would certainly argue that we want an Environment Agency that's kind of resourced and empowered to do its job.
Would that be for because the water industry monitoring will be continuous monitoring, and now the Environment Agency do that, but they also take a lot of samples for laboratory analysis. Do you when you talk about the Environment Agency doing more monitoring, do you mean both of those?
Yes, I mean both. I mean both of those. I mean the water industry does do a lot of continuous monitoring, but again, I think it's vitally important that the environmental regulator should be carrying out all of the monitoring that it feels it needs to do in order to have that. It is the case that water companies in the past, I mean, Southern Water has fined over £100 million for cheating, and it will not be the only water company, I suspect, that is guilty of that. So for us, it's maintaining that separation, and the first best thing is the Environment Agency does that work. In that absence, we've set up things like Smart Rivers, our citizen science approach. There are other citizen science approaches, and they're absolutely fantastic. And it's absolutely wonderful that we are getting volunteers out there to collect kind of data independent of the water companies and independent of the water companies, basically. And I think that's really important. The reason I've gone into that, the water companies have the ability to manipulate the data, manipulate where people are doing the sampling and so on. So having that independence is fantastic. It is, essential in the environment we're in, where the EA does not have those resources, that we are able to mobilize and motivate citizen scientists to do the work. It's really, that's really important. But it's challenging stuff, and to get all of the information out of the samples you possibly can, you need to be able to look at the sample. You have to take it away from the riverbank, pickle it, analyze it under a microscope, and tease out what's in the sample. And we teach people that, and people are learning to do it. But that is hard work, and they will spend many hours of a winter evening poring over a microscope to kind of deliver that work. And I'm proud of our volunteers that they do that. Some of the lesser some of the other citizen science systems are less demanding in terms of the analysis, but as a result of that, they're great in giving you a pretty good fix on really serious gross pollution type problems. But digging into the nuances of water quality, they're less useful at that. So that's why we try to establish what we do, which mimics the Environment Agency's sort of invertebrate monitoring process. But yeah, it's a long-winded way of saying that we welcome all of the monitoring, but it's important to make sure that the data is kind of audited, that the process makes sense, and that it's transparent. And that's what we're aiming to do with our work. But underlying all that, we're on record. We wrote a report a few years ago saying that, called Doing Its Job, which calls for the Environment Agency to have the resources to monitor, to inspect, and then ultimately to enforce. And the process of enforcement requires them to have their own evidence, unfortunately. So to the extent that they're not gathering that evidence, there is an issue as to how the extent to which water companies can be, or farmers can be held to account.
Okay, and then last question, we've got about a minute to answer it in.
Okay.
What's your position on the government's recent announcements with regard to nutrient pollution from construction?
Well, basically disappointing, really. The opportunity to do this is actually in the Environment Act. I mean, the levelling up kind of legislation. So it shouldn't have come as necessarily an out of the blue shock, but one had hoped that the existing situation whereby the local authorities in protected areas are following Natural England's guidance would have remained intact. That may well not be the case, but we would make the point that actually, and ironically, nutrient neutrality isn't anywhere near enough. If there's too much of this stuff in the environment, we need nutrient negativity, basically. So we should be engineering really significant reductions of the amount, and we should be reducing, not holding constant the amount of nutrients entering the environment. We need to be reducing it so that over time the amount of phosphate and nitrates in or around water is actually declining. So I mean, obviously our reaction is one of sort of disappointment. It is possible that the problems are dealt with properly by the water water companies and by agriculture directly. And there is this notion in planning that kind of local planners possibly shouldn't be getting in the way of the Environment Agency policing those farmers and water companies.
Sure.
It's a bit muddled, but basically we need a lot less nutrient going into the environment some way or other.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, we're going to have to bring it to a close there. It's been fascinating talking to you, Nick. I think we could probably talk all day given the opportunity. So
Great.
Thanks very much for your time, and look forward to seeing you again soon.
Okay, great. Thank you.